Okay, we're live. Can you see Rafa? Okay, you see the back of Dad's head, but you can also see
Or-
Rafa. You got a clear shot of the front.
Or you can.
Oh, here, I'll scoot it up a little.
Yeah.
There, that's good. You'll see.
Can you see the presentation model or not?
Not really.
Oh, that's
Here, if it's here, yeah, we should be able to see you.
fine. Okay.
And maybe a little bit of a professor's hand, not much. Okay. So this is the link. Copy. Mom, do you have my phone?
Yeah, I do. I was gonna take a picture of your product and put it. You send the link now?
Yeah. Okay, so we're live on the internet.
Okay.
Nobody's watching yet.
Checking for viewers already.
No, I have to send the
She
link.
has to send the link. Well, that helps.
Right.
With your slides, you're gonna keep it kind of low and so you
Yeah,
can see better. Yeah.
Mike. No, let's do that, right?
Yeah. That's kind of glaring on
If you keep it dark, Rafael, your committee won't be able to write notes. Yeah, I mean.
Just kind of stand by your line.
I'm still sending this thing.
No, I can get you from there.
No sé por qué dice que no tengo conexión.
No?
No.
Can you send it to your data?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's like, I said, you have to like sign up.
I just did.
Hey guys,
It still doesn't want to do it. Good morning.
it's still early. Why are you coming? You want to see the plan?
You're supposed to get a good seat for lunch.
Huh?
Wants to stay there.
Okay.
Oh, actually, we're live streaming it. I'll send you the link.
Better.
Yeah.
Alright.
Or we can send it if you have Lila's phone number, Rafa. I can text it to her.
Yeah, whatever you said.
Just send it to me.
Yeah. Okay. I'm getting.
I need to turn off my phone. I mean, the presentation is not gonna be that visible from the.
Cold over here by the window.
I like the slide.
Did you start it?
Not through the camera, just straight from.
It's recording now. Don't forget to use the mic.
Okay.
Turn it on right here.
And this records, and then you upload that to or it's uploaded.
I'll give you the link
Okay.
and then you can send it out to everyone, because it's your dissertation.
Yeah.
Or-
Yeah.
So you want that publicized for anyone to read?
Yeah, for everyone to like see on there, like after the fact, but,
Not just Iowa State?
no, everyone, yeah.
Everyone?
Yeah, because,
Okay, I'll have Tracy put it on the YouTube channel.
yeah, because that helps me when I'm like looking for a job, and say like, oh, you guys got learn more about my dissertation.
Okay, so it's recording now? Don't get the mic.
Okay.
Okay,
I will not.
and don't touch anything, you're all good to go.
Okay.
Okay.
Don't touch anything.
Yeah.
Good advice.
Look, I figured this out yesterday. Where is it? Caballete corner. You see it?
Oh. Yeah, it looks different. Didn't really do that.
It's 8:40. Okay, so who else am I sending it to? Grandpa?
You can send it to me and I can send it to this third.
Yeah.
Grandpa,
Uh-huh.
do you have his?
We're gonna record this. and-
Send it to him and I'll send it out to the other people.
I bet. Well, I mean, we know that we're gonna be alone. Yeah. No, it's coffee cake.
Oh, second.
It's like that. Yeah, it's very sweet. So. Which was grandma's recipe. Okay.
Okay, Rafa, I'm sending you the link so you can send it to Laura.
Well, no, you need to send it.
I know it's just a clear up there.
Why not? Yeah.
Here, I'll compromise. I'll move up one more.
I need you to ask me questions.
Oh, you'll get questions. I'm sure of that. I'm sure of that.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Good. I'm setting up this live stream so family in Mexico can watch.
Oh, fun.
So I'm checking with them to see that they can see it. Perfecto.
I got through.
Hola.
I got through the whole dissertation yesterday.
Did you?
Yeah.
Nah.
I did. Can't say that I read it all. With
Ok, aquí pues dejo la
great
computadora.
intensity.
Estamos
Components with a great intensity.
a
Read the whole thing.
10 minutos de empezar la presentación. Llegó
But
un
did you-
profesor, están llegando algunos alumnos
you-
más y ustedes están aquí en la primera fila, entonces no van a ver la audiencia, pero aquí enfrente estará Rafa. Aquí donde.
So it was. But did you like? I mean, two of the chapters like you were.
Oh, yeah.
familiar, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So
So
it's that last chapter I think that to me I need the most help.
actually, that one was. I thought that was pretty intriguing. So,
Yeah.
Well, and so I'm writing I have to write a blog for one of the projects out here. Yeah. I had no subject for this blog until ASA last week.
So what are you writing?
It's so I'm going to write about sustainable intensification on plenary. I'm going to read yours and so that's in the introduction.
Yeah.
You have a little bit on that, and then we got to thinking about the NUE from the systems perspective. So that made me think about that a little bit too. So I don't know how much I might capture a couple statements or comments somehow in that blog.
Yeah.
Because it's supposed to be a conservation related blog, and so I'm about halfway done with it. I spent a lot of time saying, we have a very intensified system already.
Yeah.
How do we have this sustainable do it?
Yeah.
So I think that comes into play.
So you guys sitting way clear in the back?
And I haven't sent these. I don't feel so great, but I mean, I didn't really. We'll see. Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. And right now I'm having a hard time setting up.
So like if people.
It's my question.
I mean,
I think everyone.
yeah, it's something like we should.
Actually, I think that those.
Ahora yo tengo el teléfono de Rafa por si Hay mensajes. It's still raining.
Maybe next year. Maybe just try next year.
Try it in next year?
Yeah.
I mean, next year's in like 2 months.
Yeah, let's just start. I'll be back in the.
No,
No, it's a shame that I realized.
Are you ready?
Hello.
Don't worry, yesterday I was like
Yeah.
rehearsing.
Yeah. And we have the laptop set up so that we have issues on the live stream. So that's kind of my job. The live stream. Bueno, apagamos el teléfono de Rafa porque no dejaba de sonar. Por alguna razón no funcionaba en vibra. Pero pues ya nos ven aquí.
yeah, they are. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Morning, how are you? 5 minutes.
is that what we're counting?
So, Saturday, I sent my report. Sunday and Monday, he was just like writing like my presentation for ASA. Tuesday was presenting, and then Wednesday through like yesterday was
Yeah.
so nonstop.
So you're gonna have a Thanksgiving.
Yeah. Well, so I'm interviewing for Minnesota. On Wednesday. So I need to prepare for that and.
My only problem is that
How about that? We're live streaming it too. Apparently you can.
It'd only be more like that.
But no. I did try.
Huh?
You don't have to know what it means.
So, ABC.
40 minutes.
You don't have to know.
Yeah, but.
So I would say that. Next year.
Yeah, but when I say.
See, you guilted me.
No.
At least Matt was in the same road I started off.
Well, you can still know. So he's like,
I feel left out there.
I was like.
So, we're trying to make muffins, and they're terrible. So we pulled out, which was our grandma's coffee cake.
Okay.
So you were baking
the night before your defense. Huh? That was your big preparation.
It was my like decompressing sort of moment, which after like the failure of the muffins is like not very.
Or was Rachel doing the big?
Well, she was doing baking, but then I helped her.
Those are peas, you get.
Like, all the way.
Huh? I'm thinking, but consider. Do I need to stand up?
Why don't you stand in the front? Rafael, you're gonna have to stand in the front. It is yours. Do your job, buddy. Don't let the house down. So far, everybody's on really down.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Geez, it will be hard to like follow up Hannah and like.
Yeah, exactly. So. It's really good. Have you tasted it?
Oh, I have tried.
Yeah.
It's like 75% sugar.
Probably for that.
I was there, that's right.
I'm ready to reserve the front space for committee members.
No, we're all here.
Let's wait for Dr. Roots.
Okay.
Just 30 seconds. Can you introduce yourself?
I made the draft and we were like, no, it looks like
The cup was last
I'm gonna sit with you.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch for you.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, teachers.
The best thing for a week to start is with the defense, right? Okay, Gina, please come here. I will start with something that I just saw and was impressed. It was the first time to see a PhD defense advertised in t-shirts.
Yeah.
I don't know how that happened, but
What
when
does
it's
it
something
say?
related to R and data analysis and everything.
Yeah, it has a joke. It says, do you know any jokes about nitrate? It's written, no, INO2.
Okay, I don't think that Rafa needs lots of introduction here. Everyone knows in this room Rafa, right? So I will tell you a little bit story how I started working with Rafa. He finished his master's here in the Department of Agronomy, and then he came to my office and he asked for a PhD position. And I asked him, okay, what do you want to do? And he told me, I want to do a system analysis. I said, well, you are in the right place. And this is how we start working together. It was an honor to work with Rafa over the last 3.5 years. He led 4 research projects and he turned them into publications. 2 are in print, 1 is under review, and the other one is going to be submitted next week once we are done with the defense. He also contributed a lot in the FAX project. He was handling all the soil data and the soil water and nitrate data. And he also contributed to some more publications, making a total of 6 or 7. I don't remember very well what's the final number. So today, Rafa is going to give us a short overview of what he did over the last 3.5 years. And Rafael, are you ready?
Yeah.
And let's keep that in half an hour.
All right, we'll try.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Sotiris, for those kind words. Yeah, hopefully I can summarize the last 3.5 years of my life in just 10 minutes. We'll see. Yeah, because I mean, to be honest, my dissertation. Okay. My dissertation is actually had a lot of efforts in day one. It contains 6 chapters, about 200 pages, 37,000 words, 56 figures and tables. I commend my committee for reading all that. 3,600 hours that took me to assemble all of these different research papers. 4,500 miles driving from Des Moines back to Ames and to the research sites. And let's say that at least more than one field vehicle. Right? I can say that literally I survived my dissertation. And I guess at its core, my dissertation is about trade-offs, right? Taking a field vehicle and turning it into a research publication, right? But also the trade-off between crop production, of grain production, and sometimes the environmental quality in the Midwest, right? And I really don't have to go into detail of what I mean by the trade-off, right? We need to add nitrogen in the Midwest to grow profitable crops, but we also have a bunch of different ecosystem these services from increased nitrogen additions to the system. And as an example, those nitrate loads that end up in the surface waters, we all know what that entails for the hypoxia in the Gulf of Mexico, and nitrous oxide emissions from soils that make a large part of the global warming impacts from agriculture. The question here is not about the trade-off itself, but what drives that trade-off, right? So what are those factors that influence that trade-off the most, right? And we're dealing with a very complex system, a system that has many moving parts. We have crops growing, we have soil fertility aspects, soil hydrology aspects, the weather factors driving the system, and management decisions that influence how all those fluxes cycle in the system, right? So we have a very complex system, and so trying to use that system to be able to understand what drives the factor was kind of what my dissertation tried to address. And to be able to address this question, I used a systems analysis approach. This I borrowed kind of through my conversations with Sotiris and Renee, how we wanted to integrate this systems analysis approach, right? So I'll go very quick how, overall we went about doing research for the publications that I'm gonna present here. And all of them follow a very similar pattern, right? So we get some field data from long-term experiments that have different measurements, so weather, soil measurements. We have daily weather, we have management information, crop and soil processes, so temperatures, soil water, so forth. We have crop growth sometimes and yields, right? And we get all that data to be able to test and calibrate different cropping system simulation tools, being AppSim, the one that we use for this dissertation. Now, I'm not going to go into the calibration and testing, although I know it's like super fun, but if I want to get half an hour, I won't be able to address that. But I refer you to my dissertation. There's plenty of details on how we went about calibrating and testing AppSim. Then we use AppSim, calibrated and tested, to run some simulation experiments and be able to ask questions and extrapolate the data beyond just the field experiments that we have. questions like what if we have different weather, what if we have different soil conditions to begin with, what if we have different management. And then we use that simulated data set to run through some analytic tools and be able to interpret the results. So the general questions that we're going to address throughout this presentation are twofold, and I want you to keep it in the back of your mind as we move along. What are the main drivers of the trade-offs of end-loss and yield, and what are the potential management options that are available to minimize this trade-off? A quick presentation outline of how we're going to proceed. First, I'm going to try to convince you that we need a systems perspective to be able to understand the nitrogen cycling and use efficiency, and to be able to evaluate systems and trade-offs. Then we're going to move on to an example of rye cover crop and the system analysis that we proceeded to do in this example. Then we're going to zoom out and address some large-scale management scenarios and be able to see a combination of practices that can help us mitigate trade-offs. And then, if you guys behave, I might show you a little bit of an unrelated aspect of my dissertation. That's a simulation of grain dry down, but it only deviated. And then some conclusions and final thoughts. Okay, so we're here now. Let's start with the system analysis for natural use. So how do we measure trade-offs, right? This is a very, as I said, it's a very complex system. There's a lot of moving parts. Which of the arrows here should I grab to be able to evaluate the trade-off, right? It helps if we make the system a little bit less complex and just zoom out a little bit. We use this framework called a box model. The box represents the stock of the nitrogen in our system, right? So we have cycling within the system nitrogen between the soil and the crop, but the long-term storage of nitrogen is in the soil, right? Long-term, that's where our nitrogen resides. Then we have nitrogen coming into our system through the nitrogen inputs, which could be negative fixation, atmospheric deposition, fertilizer, manure. There's also some other pathways that through nitrogen gets into the system, but these are the main ones. And then nitrogen outputs, we can have nitrogen in yield, so the amount of nitrogen that we remove in the grains. And also other pathways of loss, environmental losses, that those are the ones that we want to minimize. Denitrification, leaching, volatilization will be another one, but these are the ones that we included in this box model. All right, so analysis of trade-offs gets usually evaluated using this framework or this index that people call the nitrogen use efficiency index. Now, if you ask 5 agronomists what is nitrogen use efficiency, you're gonna get 20 answers, right? So, but a very not controversial way of talking about nitrogen use efficiency is just the ratio between the nitrogen that we remove in yield divided by the nitrogen that come into the system, so the inputs, right? We can also express this NUE as terms of the difference between nitrogen inputs and nitrogen yield, which in some publications you'll see this called the nitrogen surplus. This nitrogen surplus is thought to approximate the nitrogen losses in the long term. And this is sort of captured in this, what I call the nitrogen mantra. So like basically every nitrogen paper that you read is gonna have this phrase. We need to improve nitrogen use efficiency to protect environmental quality and improve crop production, which I think is code word for just minimizing trade-off, right? And well, let's see if that holds up. So the research question that we have for this paper is how well does the NUE and the N surplus approach accounts for environmental losses in the Midwest? And 2, how much of that nitrogen loss is attributed to the inefficient use of nitrogen input? So it's basically, we're taking this approach to be able to look at where are our nitrogen losses coming from. So here I'm going to present AppSim simulations for 2 sites, Kelly and Nashua. They've been, the AppSim was calibrated with field data, and I'm presenting the average for 30 years, 35 weather years. And I simulated various cropping systems, continuous maize, maize soybean, and maize soybean plus rye cover crop, right? So let's start with the maize soybean rotation. So we see that overall, the system received more nitrogen that it removed in grains, right? So therefore, that the surplus is about 21 kilograms per hectare per year, right, in this system. But when we actually see how much absent simulated losses, we see that the losses were much higher than what was predicted by the nitrogen surplus measure, right? About 2 times, right? If we look at continuous maize, actually the end surplus metric was able to predict much better what the losses were. For the maize soybean rotation with dry cover crop, we see that although there was a reduction in the amount of losses here, right? So it went about 20% reduction in nitrogen losses. We see that the NUE didn't really change, right? So the NUE framework wasn't able to even account for the improvements in the losses, right? So what's going on here? So if we see the index that I'm talking about as NUE, we basically are actually characterizing how much the crop is responding to the nitrogen inputs into the system, right? So we can actually call this more like an NUE of the crop, right? However, the NUE of the crop only works for predicting nitrogen losses if we assume that the system is in equilibrium, right? So that means that the system is not gaining or losing nitrogen in the long term, right? But we saw in the previous graph that the system, at least for maize soybean rotation, is not in equilibrium. We're actually extracting more nitrogen than putting in, right? So to be able to fully account for what's going on in the system, we actually have to account for nitrogen losses. And if we account for these nitrogen losses, I'm calling this NUE of the soil, right? So it will give us a little bit more certainty of what the balance of nitrogen in the soil is in the long term. So if we calculate the NUE of the soil, we see that the continuous maize system with only nitrogen outputs are about only 3% more than nitrogen inputs on the yearly scale. But for maize soybean, it's about 16% larger the outputs than the inputs. Right, so we can take this framework and to be able to estimate how many of those losses are actually then attributed to the inefficient use of nitrogen, and how many of them are attributed to just the loss from the inherent soil fertility. So for maize soybean, we have on average we have 46 kilograms per hectare per year loss, and these losses are both for leaching and denitrification losses. From those, only 46% were attributed to that end surplus, so that there's more inputs than what's moving grain. The other 54% is actually just due to the reductions in soil organic matter in the long term. For the maize soybean with rye, it seems that it's sort of like a similar thing. We were able to reduce nitrogen losses from the soil from 25 to 50. So we retain extra 10 kilograms per hectare per year. And for continuous maize, as we saw, most of them of the losses are actually related to that loss, to the inefficient use of nitrogen. So what's going on? Why is it so different between the two crop systems? So I have this graph here. On the y-axis, I'm plotting daily nitrogen flux, and on the x-axis is days within the 2 rotation cycle. This is a corn soil rotation. Then you see the areas. We have the gray area representing the mineralization rate, or how much is mineralized. And then we have nitrogen losses, the red area over here. We have soybean uptake, and then maize uptake. Right? So I want to just show here how much different there is mineralization before corn than before soybean, right? And that has to do, as we know, with residue dynamics, right? Before corn, we have a soybean residue that is very much lower than what we have with corn. It has a lower C/N ratio, so it decomposes faster. And basically, by the time we plant corn in the spring, there's really not much left in the soil, covered soil. And so the soil warms up a little bit faster, and therefore we know that microbes like warm and moist conditions. With maize residue in the other side, it has a higher C/N ratio, and we just have more of it in the soil, and therefore the mineralization rate it acts as a temporary sink for nitrogen while it decomposes, right? It immobilizes a little bit of nitrogen, decreases the soil temperature, and therefore we have less mineralization before soil. So if we can kind of broadly think about it as the nitrogen loss after maize is mostly related to a fertilizer management problem, and the N loss after soybean is mostly a soil enrichment problem. All right, so we go back to a research question. How well does the NUE and surplus account for N losses? It works for continuous maize, but not so much for maize-soybean rotations. How much of the nitrogen loss is attributed to inefficient use of nitrogen inputs? In continuous maize, about 95%. Maize-soybean is less than 50%. And the rest is coming from the soil, right? So now we have this very nice way of looking at the NUE of the crop and NUE of the soil. Well, can we integrate these two metrics into something that is more systemic and that we can easily be able to use it to evaluate cropping systems? And we came up, we proposed this metric, which is the ratio of the NUE of the crop, NUE of the soil, what we call a systems nitrogen use efficiency, or SNUE. And if you solve the terms, basically it's the nitrogen yield divided by the nitrogen yield plus nitrogen losses, which crops people over there would recognize this somewhat as a nitrogen harvest index, but for the system as a whole, right? So if we compute the SNUE for our cropping systems, we see that we clearly can see now the benefits of adding the cover crop to the system, right? So SNUE goes from 0 to 100, 100 being the system is very tightly cycling that nitrogen, 0 is that it's not cycling at all, right? If you want to learn about this and more fun ways that we use nitrogen use efficiency, systems nitrogen use efficiency, you can go to our publication in Agriculture, Ecosystems and Environment. All right, so let's move to the rye cover crop example, right? So now we're going to switch gears and look at as a trade-off the fact that we know that nitrogen that rye can mitigate nitrogen losses, but sometimes this can also result in maize yield reductions. So this is data, measured data from the COBS experiment here in New Kelly, Iowa, and we see that rye reduced in 2 out of the 6 years reduced nitrogen losses. And in 2 out of the 6 years also reduced yields, but the years where this happened were actually different, right? So the question that we ask is what is driving trade-offs? Why sometimes we get a trade-off, why other times we don't get a trade-off, right? Well, we thought that there hypothesized that there are different causes for this. Maybe the rye is immobilizing some nitrogen when it decomposes. Maybe there's a decrease in soil temperature when the rye is acting some sort of a mulching effect and decreasing soil temperature, and therefore it's decreasing maize growth. Or perhaps we have reductions in water available for maize. So the rye is using too much water. In terms of, we also wanted to know what is the mechanism through which rye is decreasing how flows into streams. So we hypothesized 2 alternatives. One, that rye is reducing the amount of concentration in the tile, or another one that rye is reducing the amount of drainage. So as we move forward, the one of here I'm presenting average soil temperature for rye and no rye treatments, and we see that really there's nothing going on. There's very little differences between these two. So, but in terms of soil water content, I'm plotting here soil water between the rye and the no rye, and we can see that there was a little bit of an effect, but especially in those years that we have drought effects, right? 2012 and 2013, we have a substantial difference between the cover crop, the non-cover crop treatment, and the cover crop treatment, right? Using our some simulated data and some water balance calculations that we performed, we estimate that the rye, 1 megagram of rye uses about 21 millimeters of water, which is about 3/4 inch rain, right? Then we looked at the question regarding mineralization or potential immobilization, and we see that overall there's not much concern for immobilization, as 25 CN ratio is roughly a cutoff where we promote either immobilization or mineralization rate. So, but most of the time in Iowa, we are way under a 1.6. This will be 1.6 milligrams per hectare of biomass, right? So we are usually below those levels when we terminate a cover crop. So we don't see a lot of evidence for immobilization. Rye roots have a slightly higher CN ratio, so we're talking about more than 30, right? But we still, it's not a huge concern for immobilization. So what is driving this trade-off in terms of maize yield? No, rye is not immobilizing nitrogen if it's terminated early. Is it decreasing soil temperature? No. Is it decreasing soil water? Yes. In dry years, and those are the years that in our field data we actually saw those reductions. So now, how is rye reducing the nitrogen loads into tiles? Again, we saw 2 years that we saw reductions, but we didn't see really evidence of rye reducing the amount of flow water through those tiles. But instead, we saw evidence that the reductions came from just reducing nitrate concentration. So this is really another piece of evidence that support that that's the main mechanism by which rye reduces leaching. Right, so rye reduces tile concentration and not volume. Right. So, but we saw also that there's some years that there's an effect, and some other years there is not an effect. So we thought that maybe the effect has to do with the amount of rye biomass that at which we terminated the rye cover crop. So the more biomass, the higher the effect. We expected the effect to be in terms of yield reductions and in terms of nitrate loss. And as we see in the top, I'm having absent simulations, right? So we run absent for different scenarios. And in the bottom, I'm having a literature review plus our measured data from the COPS experiment. And we can see that for yield, there was no significant difference, no significant relationship overall for the reductions in yield, but there was one for nitrate loss. So bottom line, the higher the biomass, the greater we can expect the losses, the reductions in losses to be. Again, if you want to learn more about this research, I welcome you to read my paper on rye cover crop in field crop research. All right, so now let's move on to the large-scale management evaluation. And again, let me come back to this figure. I love this figure, to be honest. It just shows that there's a lot of complexity going on, and there's a lot of factors that are in the system. But then I asked the question, well, what is the most important of these factors that are driving the system? So that's one of the questions that we address in the next research paper. Which is the factors that are affecting the system the most? What explains, also asks what explains changes in the response to management? And also, what combination of management practices are most effective at minimizing those trade-offs, right? To do this, we use the Sustainable Corn public database of 2 sites. Philly and Nashville were already available to us, and then we use the rest 5 from the CornCap database. I don't know if you guys know about this treasure trove of data, but if you don't, you should Google it right after this presentation. It's awesome. It has a lot of really wealth of data for all these research networks. I just grabbed the ones that have drainage sites. All right, so with this database, we calibrated AppSim and we do all our testing and stuff. And once we did that, then we asked AppSim, okay, let's run all these scenarios, right? This is a simulation experiment where we evaluated different factors, right? So evaluated a carryover N, so a soil state, so how much nitrogen I had to begin with in the simulation. Then I had an effect of water table, so was the water table high to begin with, or was it low or medium? Well, I also examined some factors related to crop management, cultivar selection, planting date, soil management, residue removal, and cover crop, right? And for so I did this for maize. I did the same for soybean. with the difference that I added also previous crops, so what kind of residue type we had in the soil to begin with the simulation, and also the management scenario, nitrogen management scenario, so nitrogen timing and rates. All in all the combinations of these at 7 sites and 30 years of weather data gave me about 3 million simulations. So here I'm going to show you how sensible the model predictions are to our given factors. And when I mean sensitivity, I just basically mean the proportion of variance that is explained by each factor, right? So for yield, for maize yields, we see that a lot of it is just driven by weather, right? Weather year seems, this is the black area of the pie chart. It obviously changes with site, but we're talking about 40 to 70% of the variation, which checks in with our experience that we have from field experiments. For drainage natural load, it seems that a lot of the load was driven by weather, but currently in the eastern sides, there was a lot of effect of water table. In terms of drainage nitrate concentrations, it seems that a lot of what is driving the system is just how much nitrate we have there to begin with, right? So that carryover from the previous crop, and also the previous bit is driven by our nitrate rate this year. So like basically the management, the nitrate management that is here. So residual, what I mean by residual is how much nitrate we have in the soil at the end of the simulation, right? For soybean, it was similar. Yield was mostly driven by weather here, but we also had some effect of that planting and cultivar in some sites. Drainage load looks almost exactly like for maize, most of it driven by weather year, and in the eastern sites by water table. In the drainage nitrate concentrations, we have again carryover effects from the previous carryover from maize, and also we had a slight effect of cover crop. And for residual soil nitrate, I mean, I stared to this picture for an hour trying to see what's going on. I didn't see much going on. So basically, there's everything going on for the residual soil nitrate after soybean. Right, so we saw that not all the sites have the same sensitivity to the same factors, right? So I explored different factors that might explain why the sensitivity changes across the region. And these are just 2 examples of interesting relationships that I saw. On the right, I have the sensitivity of drain nitrate concentration to cover crop. So basically, we see that that the drain concentrations respond more to cover crop as we increase soil water holding capacity. On this other graph, I have a similar. So this is residual soil nitrate. So at the end of the simulation, and how is it change? How sensible it is to fertilizer rate, and that sensitivity decreases with increasing soil organic carbon, right? Which makes sense, right? So the more soil organic carbon we have, the more mineralization, and the more we see to the contributions of nitrates to our losses become smaller. We can broadly summarize these 2 figures as the more productive our soils get, the more focus we should be paying attention at increasing that soil and retention. All right, so then we ask the question, what are the best combination of management practices? Here I'm just showing for maize. For soybeans, are very similar. So it seems that the first one is nitrate rate. So reducing that nitrate rate actually was best for decreasing losses. So here I'm talking about yield scale losses, right? So it's similar metric as the SNUE that we were talking about. So reducing nitrogen rate, planting cultivars that had high nitrogen use efficiency and radiation use efficiency, and then adding cover crop, overwintering cover crops seem to be like the cherry on top, right? So adding more effect. Alright, so which are the factors that affect the system the most? We say that for yield and nitrogen loads seems to be mostly driven by environmental factors. The tile nitrate concentration was mostly affected by previous year's management, so basically how much carryover nitrate we have from the previous year, and in some measure to cover crop as well. For residual soil nitrates, this year's management seems to be the one that is affecting the system the most. What explains changes in the response to management? Soil characteristics, as we saw. Overall, more productive soils, we should focus more on improving the soil and retention. And less productive soils, we should focus more on improving fertilizer management, especially grains. And what combination of management practices is most effective at minimizing those trade-offs? Reductions in nitrogen rate plus higher NUE and RUE cultivars will help us with timely planting and adding cover crops. So basically, the more we do, we're better off we are. If you want to learn more about this and dig deeper into why I think all of this is going on, you can read chapter 5 of my dissertation. All right, so I think we can move on. You guys have behaved. You haven't thrown any rotten tomatoes just yet. So let's move on to this bonus that I had with the simulation of grain drying down. And so when I talk about dry down, I talk about basically the period after physiological maturity of grain. So once the grain has basically matured, it's not accumulating any more dry mass, we've reached that highest dry mass accumulation, then that's what we started the dry down, right? So here I'm showing simulations of an algorithm that we developed to be able to simulate dry down. And the line here, the color lines, are our simulated values, and the points are the field measurements that we have. So the field measurements here are independent, so we first calibrated and validated the model with data, and then we got some extra data to be able to validate our model. So this we were very happy on how the model performed. The bottom line is that the only thing that we need to know to be able to accurately predict dry down is to know where to start the simulation, right? So here I started all my simulations on the physiological maturity and at the point of moisture content of the grain. But we know that moisture content of the grain can actually vary a lot depending on growing conditions throughout the growing season. So there's a research gap. We need to develop a model to predict moisture content at physiological maturity. That's Teresa's next student, right?
Yep.
Yeah. All right, so if you really want to learn more about dry down and why it's important, you should check chapter 3 of my dissertation. Or if reviewers ever get around to giving us some feedback in scientific reports, maybe on scientific reports. All right, so we're almost done. I'm going to move now to some final conclusions and thoughts. So as a main take-home message to me throughout these 3.5 years of dealing with a system that is very complex is that I really, it's kind of like a humbling experience to understand how much is going on, right? So to be able to take a system and try to look at factors of soil fertility and maybe interactions with residue, and then move on to the hydrology, and then maybe look at the weather, zoom out and look at big management and weather factors. There are different ways of understanding the system, but also, I mean, at the end of the day, this is pretty hard to know. So I just, you know, as a learning experience for me, it has been very humbling, and I understand there is a lot of variation going on, but hopefully I've been able to make the case that we need to look at the system as a whole and to be able to connect those different disciplines that are going on as a approach to be able to further understand the system. And I guess if you just woke up and just want to know what this presentation was about, I'll be happy if you leave this room with these 4 messages. that poor soil and retention can contribute as much or more to N losses and inefficient use of nitrogen inputs, right? So we usually talk about nitrogen management as means of reducing those leaching, but there's really a lot that has to be developed and think about how can we keep that more of the nitrogen into the system. Two, soil climate influences can help us prioritize which of those factors to pay more attention. Should I optimize the soil and supply, or should I increase strategies to retain that nitrogen, right? So depending on where we are on the map on that gradient of soil and climate can help us focus that better. Right cover crop can mitigate nitrate concentrations in drainage without affecting maize yields in most years. And hopefully, if you go and read my paper, you'll see there's some really nice rules of thumb that we can perhaps use in terms of minimizing that risk for yield penalties. And also, it's important to account for those temporal lags in evaluative management. And as I show, a lot of what we're going to see next year in terms of losses is driven what we did wrong this year, basically, right? So sometimes when we analyze things, there's some sort of temporal lag, and so correcting for that might be a way to increase our power to test our hypothesis. With that, before taking any questions, I want to thank my funding support, the Iowa Nutrient Research Center, Iowa Soybean Association, and the FFIR, who provided funding to keep me fed and awake through my dissertation research. To the agronomy department, really, agronomy has been a home for me for the last, my agronomic home, I guess, for the last 6 years, 6.5 years of my life. And I want to thank Dr. Blanqui, I don't know, but just keeping this place alive and I'm fostering such a collaborative environment really was, to me, what helped me thrive. And if agronomy has been my agronomic home, then my agronomic family is obviously my lab mates. It's just been such an awesome ride to be able to connect and collaborate and help each other in the field. I want to thank Elnaz, Carolina, who's not here, Raciel, Isaiah, Lila, who might be listening over there, Emily. I want to thank Renee, which doubled as my advisor and also as an awesome lab mate. Pat, Katie, who also was in lab but then deserted us, and Gina, Ashley, and Mitch, which I got hooked on R, so I hope you continue the tradition of our lab. And then I also want to thank my faculty committee, Dr. Littman, Dr. Castellano, Renee, Dr. Tizzo. I want to thank Mark, and Matt Helmers, and also I want to thank Soterios for just rejecting my drafts with such a great rate so I can get them improved. But all of you guys did an awesome job of providing me with thoughtful advice and comments as I moved along, just to be able to improve this. And finally, I want to help those. I want to recognize those people that helped me from not going over the cliff and reminding me that life is more than just modeling, right? So my family in Mexico, my mom, dad, my sisters, and the Nebraska committee, which is all the way back there. Thank you for coming. Especially my better half, Rachel, who is like the one who has been able to take most of my going nuts situation. So thank you very much for all the support that you guys have given me and all the love that you guys have given me throughout my life. And with further ado, I will take questions. Thank you very much. Here as well, huh?
Very nice seminar, thank you, I appreciate it. You didn't talk very much about the soils that you considered if you look at the sites and you put the model together,
Mhm.
and how much variability there is in the soils.
Yeah.
And so my question revolves around field scale management versus precision management of nitrogen in different scenarios that you considered, and what fraction of the improvement in nitrogen use efficiency could be obtained if we had precision management as opposed to field scale.
Yeah, and I think, so I don't know if everyone heard the question, but the question is about, how much can we expect nitrogen losses to improve if we actually develop more precision ag or precision management for that, improving that nitrogen use efficiency. And I do think that that's something that I personally want to pivot to as I move on. So like, Absing is a point model, right? So we talk about, an average for a field or so forth. But there is really potential to be able to use these tools on a subfield scale, right? Now, we know there's research out there that suggests that actually there's hotspots within the field that contribute the most to the end losses, right? Especially those that in which the yield potential is low, and we either apply the blanket rate or we over apply fertilizer. So I do think that there's real potential for improving nitrogen fertilizer use, and but I think at the end of the day, we need to keep thinking as an integrated system, right? So yes, we can potentially, and I guess this might be a good way of showing this, right? So even if we are 100% efficient on how we use our fertilizer, right? And there we go. Even if we are 100% efficient on how we use our fertilizer, but there's certain background losses that just come from the fact that mineralization and crop uptake are not synchronized at all, right? And we can see, that's why. We can see in this figure how really for the soybean part, there's a little bit more synchronization with the mineralization, right, and the crop uptake than there is with a maize system, just because of the residue dynamics, right? So trying to do something about this if we want to keep a maize soybean system, I think that's important, right? But I guess when we're talking about just maize, I think that improving that fertilizer management is also key. Sorry for the long answer. Thank you.
More questions?
Renee, you have a question? You said it.
Was super clear.
Go ahead and ask a little bit more about this figure. Also thought it was great. Thank you. So you said, if I understood correctly, that in-laws after maize is fertilizer and after soybean is in retention. But if I look at that figure and understand it correctly, it looks like things go to zero before and after soybean, but they don't after corn. Am I looking at that correctly?
You mean the losses?
Well, I mean, yeah, there's no.
Yeah, so I mean, we need to think about also, how much nitrogen we have at the end of every part of the rotation, or every phase of the rotation. And yeah, to be honest, I've been trying to think, what is driving this. So I think I want to be clear that I'm not, if you measure and then you say isotope dilution and you're like very good at like measuring, I'm not saying that the fertilizer and that you apply 45% that is out of the tile is going to be that, right? But overall, on the long-term scheme, if we can keep that nitrogen fertilizer cycling within the system, right? Within soil mineralization dynamics, crop uptake, right? Eventually, it's just gonna build up, right? The thing is that nitrogen fertilizer is cycling with the system. Eventually, there's not gonna be anything that's gonna take it out, right? So in this simulation, we see that really there is not much leaching going on after soybean, right? And but there is plenty of leaching going on, especially when corn is young, right? So there is really not a lot of leaching going on. So I would say that this part, if that's related to that fertilizer management situation, so we have fertilizer hanging in the soil, so the concentrations in the soil are high, and then we have those losses going on. But in the soybean situation, it's just a matter of the soil is pumping out nitrogen, and we increase the concentrations way more in the spring rather than after the harvest, right? So yeah, I mean, this might be a little bit unrealistic in terms of what we know happens in Iowa, right? The soils freeze, and APSIM doesn't really have that built into it. But overall, we see that a lot of those losses anyway, even when the dynamics are not there, they get bumped into the earlier spring, right? So, and I mean, we see that like continuous corn and corn soybean rotations, continuous corn has slightly higher contributions of nitrogen leaching overall, right? It's not that much different, but the losses in soybean after soybean are not zero either, right? So it's not all just due to that fertilizer management. That's kind of like my main message. And the fact is that our systems are very well managed, right? At this point, like if we look at the COPS experiment, we're doing LSNT, we're doing trying to keep nitrogen levels that are optimum, right? So we're not over applying fertilizer to be honest, to be able to match those crop requirements. So these systems are already pretty optimized in terms of what we can do with conventional tools. But we're not talking about those egregious losses of 100 kilograms per hectare. People applying twice the amount of nitrogen that they need. So, but at the end of the day, when we do the calculation, we see that we're bumping to that limit where just the soil is contributing, right? So like what I like to call the background losses. That even if we didn't apply any fertilizer, we still see losses, right? And that's just because it's coming from the soil.
Rafa, in this analysis, tell us a little bit about the planting date of maize and soybean.
Yeah, so
it was the same or different?
In this analysis, we planted maize, I think May 1st, and soybean it was May 5th. So just try to simulate what the management out there in the field is. And as we saw in, well, I guess I didn't present that, but earlier planting and planting long maturity soybean cultivars actually helped a lot to be able to reduce and we take advantage of that nitrogen that's hanging out. Or at least a lot of it is just like trying to catch that nitrogen fertilizer and nitrogen just cycling within the system. And whatever we can do to try to improve that is best. And cover crops help. I wouldn't say that they're the solution, but certainly help.
I want to follow up on this simulation also. Is this just a one-time simulation with one climate data set, or have you averaged 30-year data set?
Yeah, so this is the average for 35 years of weather data and 2 sites. So we have the COP site and then we have national. So this represents the average.
Okay. And Secondly, have you factored, does this assume a no-till management or some kind of
In
tillage?
crops, we have no till, and in Asha, we do have tillage. So I guess but I guess at least in Upstream, and I've tried this, Upstream doesn't care about tillage. And as far as I know, there is really not that much effect in terms of losses. I mean, there might be a little bit higher potential if you have no tillage because you have that higher infiltration and more losses. But in terms of the water balance in Upstream, there is really not that much of an effect.
Of tillage.
Of tillage, yes.
Okay, and how much variation, if you had put error bars on your nitrogen loss as a function of climate, how much variation would you see?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it varies from like 0 some years to maybe 60, 100. So yeah, I mean, that's one of the important things that I wanted to address in my last chapter, right? So how much that variation in net and loss is driven by weather. And we saw that about 40 to 60% of it is just driven by just changes in weather, right? If we do the same management. And some of that also driven by the water table in the sites. And I didn't show that data, but I have a relationship that basically as the water holding capacity increases, the variation explained by water table actually decreases, right? And that I think that has to do with just like buffering capacity of the soils and the hydrology, which I think that Matt Helmers would probably give me a hard time with that relationship. Thank you for the question.
So I'm seeing more nitrogen mineralization during soybean, but there is no nitrate leaching. Is that accept that not simulating nitrate leaching?
So you said that there's no. So this is the fall, right after soybean, right? And there's really like not that much leaching going on that fall. I think that that's something that we would expect, generally. Like if you. I mean, you've measured nitrate concentrations after soybean. They're 5 kilograms per hectare or something like that. So, but the leaching actually coming into corn, it seems that it's mostly during that early growing season, right? So that April, May window, that all like most of it seems to just be coming out of the mineralization. Corn plants are not doing anything until mid-June, right? So, and whatever we have hanging out that have been mineralized and then moved down to the soil profile, that already has happened in April, right? So there is not much that corn roots, I don't know, Dr. Roots can tell us, about the growing rate of roots, but the roots are not going to be that deep in early April.
Actually, during fall, if you see nitrate concentration in soybean, following soybean, there is more nitrate, soil nitrate compared to corn. So that's why I'm wondering, like, if there is more soil nitrate in soybean, following soybean, why there is no nitrate leaching at that time?
Yeah, so I guess I think that there's like the lag, right? So if you apply fertilizer here we're applying at planting, right? So you apply fertilizer at planting, right? And some of it is taken up by the plant, but some of it moves slowly towards the bottom of this profile where it's leached, right? So there's a little bit of a lag. Obviously, some of that could be days, some of it could be months, depending. But for soybean, we have higher concentrations of leaching, right? Of nitrate, but a lot of it just is driven by, the composition of the residue, especially during the fall, right? It's not, there's not an effect of, fertilizer that's been hanging there for 2 years, right? So that's why I don't exactly know why AppSim at this point is like not simulating losses, or if it's simulating, it's really just taken out by the average. Maybe some years there is losses, some years are not losses. I mean, there's kind of like a little bit, but most of them seem to be coming out from that.
But what are your climatic conditions? The falls are probably on average drier than the springs, right?
Yes, I guess that would be a good point. So, and this, as I say, this is 30 years of weather, so it's supposed to kind of take some of that into account, but overall we see a trend that the falls are getting a little bit warmer, but a little bit drier, if I'm correct. And this kind of like the peak of the precipitation is moving a little bit earlier into our growing season as well. So like, May. And we have kind of high intensity rainfalls mostly going on in the spring as well. So yeah, I mean, we can keep inspecting this graph and see all this. I've looked at this, trying to understand the lags and the flows, and overall, I think that there's a lot of things that we need to address. And field data is very useful at doing that, but I think that modeling is also can fill in some of those gaps.
And it will be interesting. So because I'm seeing some nitrate became fallen soybean, so this is also doing fall, right? Fall. So this is also doing fall. But it will be interesting to see it further.
Yeah, it could very well be that AppSim is overestimating the amount of losses that we have in the, I guess, dead of winter, just because we don't have that freezing and thawing situation going on as far as I know. So maybe a lot of it is just being leached much earlier than it should have. But again, I'm talking about averaging 30 years of weather data. So eventually, some of these errors should average out, right, in the long term when we talk about our budgets.
Any more questions?
About dry down, maybe? No one is interested in dry down? No, okay.
Okay, let's thank one more time, Rafael.
There's plenty of coffee cake, I think.
Yep.
Please eat some. Thank you for coming. $50-something. Thank you.
Voy a cerrar la computadora porque ahora empieza la sesión cerrada con los profesores. I'm going to sign off now because this is the start of the closed session with the professors. Bye.